The morning after making the pact, Amaka expected to feel guilty or scared. Instead, she felt a strange energy buzzing inside her. It started as a tingly feeling, making her very aware of her body. But as she went about her day, she realized it was more than just a feeling. In the chapel, she noticed she could hear the inner thoughts of the other nuns. Sister Chinyere was thinking about her family, and Sister Ngozi had secret doubts about her faith. At first, this scared Amaka because she knew it was a consequence of her pact. But soon, she started to feel excited. What could she do with this power? Amaka's powers continued to grow. She could hear people's thoughts clearly now, even without being near them. Their emotions bled into her own. But the more she used her powers, the more confident she became. Her sisters noticed. "Amaka, you've changed," Sister Chinyere remarked one evening as they walked in the garden. "There's something different about you." Amaka smiled, but it was cold. "We all change with time, sister. Perhaps you're the one who stayed the same." Her words echoed in the garden, starkly contrasting the laughter that used to fill the air when they were younger. Chinyere blinked, taken aback by the sharpness in Amaka's tone. It was true. The once gentle nun was no longer as soft. Her words laced with a quiet authority that made the others wary. It wasn't long before the dreams started. At first they were fleeting images that flickered through her mind and vanished when she awoke. But then they grew clearer. Amaka could see the future. In one of the first visions, she saw Sister Ngozi leaving the convent, abandoning her vows and returning to the world outside. When she approached Ngozi the next day, the older nun was shaken. "How did you know I was considering leaving?" she demanded. Amaka smiled calmly. "I just knew." But with these visions came a terrible burden. Knowing the future didn't always mean she could change it. Amaka saw herself standing alone in her dreams, isolated from everyone she had once cared for. She saw the consequences of her growing power, but the visions only seemed to spur her on, pushing her further into the darkness. Amaka began using her powers outside the convent walls, testing the limits of her influence. She ventured into the nearby village, where she began manipulating the lives of the villagers in small but significant ways. A merchant who always cheated his customers suddenly confessed his guilt to the authorities. A woman who had been unable to conceive for years discovered she was pregnant after a single conversation with Amaka. To her it seemed like she was doing good, using her powers to benefit others. But deep down, she knew this was not what her vows had been for. She was no longer simply serving God. She was playing God. Each time she bent the will of others to suit her desires, the guilt gnawed at her, but the thrill of power always won out. What she had once feared had now become intoxicating. Father Nadozi, the priest who had once mentored Amaka, began to suspect that something was terribly wrong. He had always been close to the convent's nuns, but lately Amaka's behavior had caught his attention. She was no longer the humble, pious woman he remembered. There was a new edge to her, something unnatural. When he confronted her, he tried to be gentle. "Sister Amaka," he said one evening after Mass, his concern evident in his voice, "I feel something is weighing on you. You've changed. I fear for your soul." Amaka met his gaze calmly, but a dark rage bubbled inside. Father, you have no idea what you're talking about, she said, her voice cold. I am closer to God than ever. Father Nadozi's eyes narrowed. No, Amaka. I think you are closer to something else entirely. At home, Amaka's family began to sense her change. Uche, who had recovered from his illness thanks to her pact with the devil, was the first to notice. He visited the convent one day, hoping to see his sister and thank her for saving his life, but what he found unsettled him. Amaka's once warm and caring nature was now replaced by something colder, something distant. Her words were clipped, and her eyes, once filled with compassion, seemed hollow. Their mother too sensed it, and her concern was evident. Amaka, she said softly when they visited, you've become a stranger. I am still your daughter, Amaka replied, but the words felt like a lie even to her. As her family grew more distant, Amaka's isolation deepened. The power that had once brought her joy now felt like a curse. The devil was never far. His soft and seductive voice whispered in Amaka's ear at night. They will betray you, he hissed. Your sisters and your family all fear you. They will turn on you the moment you show weakness. Amaka tried to shut him out, but the whispers grew louder each day. She began to see how the other nuns looked at her with suspicion in their eyes and spoke in hushed tones when she entered a room. Even Father Nadozi seemed to be watching her too closely. Why should you be bound by their rules? The devil whispered. You are more powerful than any of them. Take what is rightfully yours. Amaka's mind was clouded with doubt and anger. Perhaps the devil was right. Amaka's powers had grown beyond her control. She could now manipulate thoughts, emotions, and even the physical world around her. With a simple idea, she could move objects, bending reality to her will. And with this power came a swelling pride. She began to look down on the other nuns, even on the priests who once commanded her respect. They were all so small and limited in their world understanding. Only she could see the bigger picture, and she had the power to change it. The devil's whispers became her truth. She was no longer simply a servant of God, a force to be reckoned with, a power greater than anyone else in the convent. Pride consumed her, and with it, she began to push everyone away. But with great power came significant instability. Amaka found that her abilities, once controlled, now had a mind of their own. She would wake in the middle of the night to find objects in her room floating or shattering without warning. Her visions of the future became erratic and unclear. One night, during Mass, the air around her seemed to grow thick, suffocating. The candles on the altar flickered and blew out despite no wind. The other nuns watched in horror as the crucifix above the altar cracked, splintering down the middle. Amaka tried to remain calm, but inside, she was terrified. Her power was slipping out of control, and the devil's whispers only grew louder and more insistent. You are not weak, he hissed. Take control. Show them who you are. But the more she tried to control her power, the more it slipped from her grasp. Father Nadozi confronted Amaka again, this time with an air of finality. I know what you've done, he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. You've made a pact with the devil, haven't you? Amaka's face remained expressionless, but fear clutched her heart in a vice. Father, you don't understand, she began, but Nadozi interrupted. I've seen the signs, Amaka. Your power is not of God. You must repent before it's too late. Ndozi's words carried a heavy weight, but Amaka's pride would not allow her to admit her sins. Repent, she spat. For what? For saving my brother? For doing what God refused to do? Ndozi's face hardened. This is not about your brother. This is about your soul. Amaka's hands trembled and her mind whirled with anger and fear. She had made her choice long ago, and now it seemed there was no turning back.